Hey everyone, I'm Josh Olson. This is my YouTube channel, A Conversation With. Today's guest has nearly 2 decades of national television experience, as he's worked for ESPN and NBC Sports, sports anchor and reporter. He's currently a general assignment reporter at NBC Connecticut News. Today I have a conversation with the one and only Mike Massaro. Mike, how are you?
I'm well, Josh. Doing very well. I'm hoping it gets a little bit warmer here in Connecticut. We've gone back down to below freezing temperatures with the wind gusting at about 30 miles per hour. So I cannot wait until it becomes spring. But of course, here in Connecticut, that's probably not until June.
Do you guys have any snow on the ground?
The snow is gone, but the wind will blow right through you right now.
Okay, well, at least there's no snow. That's a plus, right?
Yes. We had the brief stint of spring. We call it the spring of deception. It lasted about 2 days and all the snow disappeared. And we thought it was going to get warm, but no, it's cold.
Okay, all right. So how is everything? How's the family?
Family is good. My oldest son is a sophomore in college, and my youngest son is a senior in high school, getting prepared to move away to college. He's making a big move on us, and it's going to be quite the experience. He's moving from Connecticut to California to go to college, so that's
Oh
going to
wow.
be interesting.
Oh wow. Okay. And are they following in your footsteps in television?
No, they are not.
No.
Uh,
Okay.
my oldest son is an economics major, and my youngest son is going to be studying marketing.
Okay, that's awesome. That's great. So let's start back from the beginning. Kind of, you graduated from Emerson College with a bachelor's in communication studies, and
This is correct. It's an interest in my college experience was a little bit different than most. I went to Emerson, which, as you may well know, is very communications based. It's in Boston, a
okay.
small school in a very large city. Went there for my first 2 years. And then experienced a little bit of a financial difficulty and transferred from Emerson to UConn, to the University of Connecticut,
Oh, okay.
which was for my junior year, which I now consider my year abroad. And I'll tell you why. Uh, that's because I only spent a year there. We transferred back to Emerson after my junior year. So UConn was kind of a bridge year for me. The professors at Emerson kind of kept an eye on me. We stayed in touch and we were able to work something out financially. So I transferred back to Emerson my senior year and graduated.
That's awesome. And so like during your college years, what kind of things were you involved in? Like, were you involved in like TV and broadcasting and stuff like that?
I was like a lot of college kids, I think, going into my freshman year, I was undecided. I wanted to be a communications major. I had my eye on broadcasting. I wanted to be a sportscaster, but I didn't commit to it as a major. So my major at the time, from what I remember, was mass communications, which was a very broad experience. Doing a little bit in broadcasting, a little bit in public relations, understanding the history of communications, that kind of thing. And I eventually came around to becoming a broadcaster, but that's it's a very long story, to be honest. So when I transferred to UConn, this is my dog. This is Holly. She'd like to be on
Hi,
the show
Holly.
too. Holly's going to sit over here, I hope. Um, so when I transferred to UConn, I changed my major to political science. I was a little bit frightened of the prospects in the broadcast world, and this is in the early 1990s. And I wanted to go into something a little bit more what I considered stable. And
Hmm.
I was pre-law essentially at UConn, and that was my plan. I didn't like it, to be honest. So I knew that my heart was set on becoming a sportscaster, and that's one of the reasons why I pursued going back to Emerson. And I was able to do that. I did not become a broadcast journalism major ever. As you mentioned, my degree is in communication science. That's because I needed to combine some of the credits I had at UConn, which had nothing to do with communications, in order to kind of boil them down into a degree that would allow me to graduate close to being on time. And I did. I think I had to take a couple classes in the summer of 1992 before I graduated, but I did. Um, and that's kind of the path I took. As far as things I did in college, I was on the baseball team at Emerson, not at UConn. I was more of a Division III player than a Division I player, and enjoyed that. I was in a fraternity at Emerson. made lots of good friends, lifelong friends that I still stay in touch with. And obviously took some broadcasting classes, which helped me, understand what it was all about, kind of you know, earn some respect for the industry and, build some skills. But I wouldn't say I built my total skill set until I actually did it uh, after college. And it still took some time and I'm still learning.
And what would you say? Like, I know you worked at Stafford Speedway and Street Smiths on TNN. What would you say? Like, which one was your big break? Like that really broke you into the industry that gave you that first opportunity?
Well, so you mentioned Stafford Speedway. So that in itself is a story. When I graduated from college, I was not able to get a broadcasting job, and I still wanted to be a sportscaster. In my mind's eye, I wanted to do baseball and football and basketball and hockey and the traditional stick and ball sports. And I was not having any luck getting opportunities. So my father, who was a big auto racing fan, suggested to me that I volunteer at a local racetrack, which was not too far from where I grew up, which was Stafford Speedway. And the reason he suggested that was because he had seen a couple of people go through the system at Stafford Speedway and end up on national TV. And those two people were Jack Arute, who at the time was with ABC Sports, and his family owned the racetrack, and another was Mike Joy. Mike Joy at the time
Okay, Mike Joy.
was with CBS Sports. He's now the main anchor for Fox on their NASCAR broadcast. But both of them were public address announcers at Stafford Speedway before getting their first break. So my father felt that I should give it a shot and that perhaps things would break the same way for me as it had for them. And at the time, I was skeptical, but I knew my father had made great sacrifice for me to go to college. We mentioned the financial struggles I had at Emerson and had to transfer to UConn. My dad, he was a blue collar worker, didn't make a lot of money. So to pay for my college education was a big sacrifice. So when he suggested to me that I do this, I couldn't say no. And so I volunteered. I walked up to Jack Arute on opening night at Stafford Speedway and asked if I could be part of his public address team. And he said, sure. Can you start this week? So I started that week.
Oh, wow.
And I started doing public address, doing play-by-play at the racetrack over the intercom system. And Jack took me under his wing at the time, and I'm thankful for that. He is my earliest mentor. And after a year of working at the Speedway as a public address announcer, he asked me to be part of the full-time team at Stafford Speedway. I became the public relations director for the next, I believe, 3 years. And that was actually a paid position, whereas public address was not.
Okay.
So I learned a lot about auto racing at that time, and it just kind of built within for me. It led to one opportunity after another. With radio and with TV, it snowballed from there. And if it had not been for my dad persuading me to do that and Jack Arute giving me the opportunity, I never would have gone onto the NASCAR path. And it led to great things for me. I'm so thankful for that. I was in the NASCAR world for probably a good 20 years. I haven't been in about 4. I miss it greatly. And, I often think about going back in some fashion. I just don't know how that's going to work. And I don't see how that fits for me at this time. But, that's how it began. That's where my big break started, at the Speedway.
And then just talk about Street and Smiths on TNN.
So Street and Smiths was a publishing company. So Street and Smiths owned a number of magazines, but they also had a production company, a television production company in Charlotte. And they offered me an opportunity as a reporter on the show called Inside NASCAR. It was kind of a reporter producer position where I put together feature stories, 2 or 3 of them each week. And the show aired on Sundays on TNN. And that was a great opportunity. That's when I moved from Connecticut to Charlotte. And that was in 1999. And pursued that. I will say, I talked about Jack Arute being a mentor. Another mentor I've had was Alan Bestwick. And Alan Bestwick was the play-by-play voice, the main play-by-play voice for the Motor Racing Network, MRN Radio, which did play-by-play for NASCAR races around the country. I had eventually earned a spot as a turn reporter with MRN, and that's how I got to know Alan. And just like Jack did, Alan mentored me. And found this opportunity in Charlotte where they needed a reporter on that Inside NASCAR show, got me an interview, and lo and behold, I was able to get the job in 1999. I literally packed up my little Acura Integra with all of my stuff. I'd been married, I think maybe a couple of years. I was living in a condo with my wife, just her and I left without her, with just clothes in my car, moved to Charlotte. I lived in Alan's house for about a week before I was able to find an apartment. I lived in a hotel for a little while in between, but that was the experience. I moved down to Charlotte for that job, and it was a tremendous opportunity. I stayed there in that job for a little over a year before I started meeting other people in the sport, other people on television within the sport, and it led to bigger opportunities, thankfully.
And I just want to go back a little bit. Like when you first got the job at the Speedy, did you have an interest in motorsports, or did it kind of grow on you as you were around it?
Yes, I mean, I did. As the son of my father, who was a diehard NASCAR fan, I was around it since I was a little boy. So my dad worked on a race car when I was a little boy, and I would go to Stafford Speedway and watch them race every week. So I did like the sport. It just wasn't a sport I participated in. I played baseball, as I mentioned, so that, baseball was in my blood, and that's what I thought I wanted to do. I played football. Those were the sports that I felt like I was best suited to cover. I never raced. I never drove a race car. I never worked on a race car. So, but I watched plenty of the races. I went to Daytona to see the Daytona 500. I think every year from 12 years old until I was 18 with my dad. That was our winter vacation. That's what we did. So yes, it was in my blood, but that was not I wouldn't say that was my first choice back when I was 18 years old pursuing a sportscasting career. I'm thankful that I went down that path, though. I love it. I mean, I had such great moments over those 20 years, some of the most amazing memories. I wouldn't trade them for anything.
And then after Street and Smiths, you moved on to ESPN, I believe, correct?
Yes. I moved on to ESPN in 2001. And at the time, I worked out of their Ballantyne office. Ballantyne's a section of Charlotte. So they have a remote office, not just in Bristol, Connecticut, but they had a remote office where RPM Tonight was produced. And so I worked on RPM Tonight and Sports Center in 2001. And, just to boil it down, it was 14 years at ESPN. I left there in 2014 for NBC Sports, but 14 years doing so many different things for ESPN, from RPM Tonight to Sports Center to Outside the Lines. So many experiences, worked with so many talented people. It was an amazing 14 years for sure.
And you mentioned 2001, you had just gotten to ESPN, and something significant happened at the beginning of 2001, which would be,
so the very first assignment. Well, let's take it back. So I signed my contract in probably December of 2000. So I didn't begin until January 1st. 2001, racing season didn't really begin until February at the Daytona 500, and I covered some testing events where, teams were practicing and getting ready for the season, but I didn't cover my first real racing event until the 2001 Daytona 500. And racing fans know that Speed Weeks is a lengthy event. It's not just one day. We were down there for 10 days. So we were down there for 10 days covering everything that led up to the Daytona 500. And it was going extremely smooth, I thought, and was very happy. And then the Daytona 500 happened. And Dale Earnhardt, sadly, was involved in this fatal crash. That was my 10 days into my job, really. And I had to cover one of the biggest stories in the country. So that was a challenge. It was a bit daunting. I remember it like it happened yesterday. So much about it. I was thankful that I did have some help. ESPN, understanding that I was new to the team, brought in their bureau reporter from Orlando, who you may know, Scott Van Pelt. Scott Van Pelt was a bureau reporter at that time and came in, and he and I covered the tragedy. Not only what happened that night, but also what happened in the ensuing week. Marlo Klein also came in to help, as did Ray Dunlap. So as a team, we were able to, cover that situation as well as we possibly could. It was a difficult story to cover, a lot of emotion, certainly a lot of eyeballs on that story. not just from an audience standpoint, but all of our bosses were watching very closely because it was such a serious story, and still is. It's hard for me to believe that it was 20 years ago when that transpired, but it was it's a gigantic moment in my life and in my career.
And now just talking about you as a reporter covering something like that, do you feel pressure? Like, do you feel pressure when you're reporting it, like to make sure everything's, I guess it'd be any story, but just that particular one, more pressure to make sure things are accurate and you're passing information correctly?
Yes, pressure. I guess that's the right word. Um, but I feel responsibility, in those
Okay,
moments,
that's a better
and
word.
not just the big stories like that, but in every story, I feel a responsibility. But especially in a story like that, you do not want to be wrong. And in our industry, there's often a push to be first,
Hmm.
um, and I feel some of that sometimes, but that's not my priority. My priority is always to be accurate as much as possible. And there's been times when I missed it, when I failed in that, not by choice. Um, but there's no worse feeling than, an hour after you got off air, realizing you were wrong. So I try to avoid that. And I think every broadcaster should. And I would imagine every broadcaster has felt what I've felt when I was wrong. And that's great embarrassment and remorse. You don't want to be wrong. So I would much rather be last and right than be first and wrong. And that was Holly knocking my computer off my little podium here.
Oh, that's perfectly okay. And then you mentioned some names. I just want to go back. You mentioned Scott Van Pelt. Just talk about the influence that he kind of had on the beginning of your career at ESPN and how, like, maybe he gave you some tips or advice.
Well, at the time, we were both relatively new to ESPN. He had just been hired as the bureau reporter in Orlando. He was, I think, his first month or so on the job as well. We got to know each other that weekend, but I can't say we spent a lot of time after that. We had different jobs. His job was to cover anything that happened in the Orlando area. And it was way more than just racing. I think his forte at the time was golf, and that was his strength. And you may still see that on the air with him. He covers quite a bit of golf and does an
Yeah.
amazing job. I cherish the thought that I was able to work with Scott, especially seeing where his career has brought him. We exchanged pleasantries in Bristol once I moved there quite a few times. But we didn't spend a lot of time with each other after that fateful weekend.
And then going back to like NASCAR, just talk about like you were at ESPN for 14 years. You covered NASCAR for most of them. But just talk about the schedule, like because I know NASCAR is a long season, like 36 weeks, I think.
It's 36 races
36
now,
races.
so it's 40 plus weeks, close to 40, because there's off weekends in between in the schedule. At least there was, and of course, when I was covering, especially in the early years, there was a preseason. Not races necessarily, but testing sessions, important ones. There was 2 weeks in Daytona of testing. There was a testing session in Las Vegas every year, so we'd cover all that stuff too. So the season was long, longer than, I like to tell people, who cover the stick and ball sports, uh, baseball is a long season, but
Yeah.
imagine us covering a sport that starts about 6 weeks before baseball season and ends about 6 weeks after it. So that was essentially NASCAR. It still is, although they've done a better job condensing the schedule and making it a little bit easier on the teams. And then I think that was a priority for NASCAR, not only making it easier on the teams, but less expensive too.
Now, as a reporter, you have to be there for all three races. You're there. You get there. What on? You
You mean
cover the.
you talk about the truck, Xfinity, and
Yeah, you cover all
absolutely.
three. Or are you just there for one single race, or when do
Well,
like?
generally, when we were covering it, yes. I mean, that was always the case. I don't know what the networks are doing now, but I would imagine, you're there, you might as well cover everything. So yeah, I mean, there was quite a bit to cover, especially back in the day when we did RPM Tonight. I mean, we covered everything that moved.
So you leave on Thursday, you get back on Monday, so you're barely at home, or you just go
Yeah, I mean,
straight
it's
through.
it's it's, it's a 5 day work week. It's just different than your traditional work week. Travel on usually on Thursday and Mondays. Um, that was the case. Sometimes you'd come back on Tuesdays too, Josh, because it rained and the race was on Monday. And I've even had events where I came back on Wednesday because it got delayed, it got postponed until Tuesday. So rainouts were never fun. You may follow on Twitter when NASCAR reporters are tweeting during rain delays. It is, trust me, it's aggravating to say the least. It is aggravating because you want to get home. I mean, you do this week after week after week after week. And like anybody else, you know, when your 5-day work week suddenly gets turned into a 6-day work week and you weren't expecting it and you're not getting paid anymore,
That's no fun.
it's hard. So, yeah.
So I know you were at ESPN for 14 years. You went to NBC Sports. Talk about maybe the transition, like the differences going from one to the other, because they're both really big networks.
That's an interesting question. I think the culture was a little bit different at NBC than it was at ESPN. I don't know how to describe it necessarily. I enjoyed my time at both places. It was just, I guess my job was different, and maybe that's why it felt different. My job at NBC Sports was predominantly a pit reporter rather than a straight, Sports Center reporter and a host. Although I did host a show at NBC Sports just like I did at ESPN. I felt like, being a pit reporter more than, at NBC, I was a pit reporter more than I was just a straight reporter. And that was, live, probably, I don't know, let's say 4 hours per broadcast. So if you did the Xfinity race and the Cup Series race, NBC did not do the truck races. So we did those two races. So the live experience was so much different than writing a script and getting sound bites and logging sound and putting together a package. It was all live off the cuff. So the preparation process was quite a bit different. Trying to get everything in your head before you went on air so that you could be as fluid as possible and just adapt to any situation that may pop up. I mean, nothing was really scripted other than maybe the first, hit you do, which is your opening whip. And that's about the only thing that was scripted the whole race. I used to go into the race at NBC with just I had a poster board cut in half, and I would just write columns down all the way down the poster board, each column representing one of the cars that I covered that day. And I put in some bullet points in each column so that I had some notes. But I mean, it was just like a one-word reminder of what the story was.
Mm-hmm.
So the preparation was definitely a lot different. To be a pit reporter at NBC, being a pit reporter at ESPN was the same, but that wasn't my primary job at ESPN. But I enjoyed both places. Great people, great teams. Certainly 14 years at ESPN, I felt like we were family to a large degree because I spent so much time with them. But 2 years at NBC, I still felt like I created some bonds, and I miss quite a few of those people too.
And do you have a favorite track you like to go to, like to work at, I guess you could say?
I do. It's Daytona. Love Daytona. And it's funny. So I mentioned that when I was young, I was 12 years old, I think, when I first went to Daytona, and went there, just about every year until I graduated high school with my family. So when I would go to Daytona as a professional to cover a race, mentally, I almost felt like I was on vacation. I mean, I was relaxed. It had a different feel for me. So, not to mention, the magnitude of the events that happen at Daytona, are different, different animal too. So I love going to Daytona, still do. Even after I left NBC, I went to Daytona, the Daytona 500 the following year, just as a spectator, if you will.
Okay.
Wasn't working, just went just to see people and just to be there. And so Daytona is my favorite place.
It seems like Bristol might be a fun place. I don't know how it is like working there because
it's a hard place to work.
It's a hard place to work.
It's a hard place to work. It's a cool place to watch a race. It's a hard place to work for a couple of reasons. It is incredibly loud. So as a reporter of any sort, you're struggling to hear answers from drivers, to have them hear your questions. In the live setting, there were times where I had to hide between trailers, or maybe even in a trailer, to do a report, just because you couldn't hear me if I didn't. And you'd have to take the microphone and literally put it right up here, like it touching your lips almost, to make sure it cut through the noise. It was difficult. And the emotions that were involved at Bristol also added a twist because you deal with angry drivers a
Yeah.
lot. And angry drivers aren't always the easiest to deal with because sometimes they'll take their frustrations out on the reporters, um, which had to be delicate with your questions as much as possible, and just when you approach people, and the weather too. So in the spring race, I've been to the spring race in Bristol where it snowed.
Oh
Okay, it's
Lord.
been cold and snowed, and the summer race is the complete opposite. I've been to the summer race where it's been 100 degrees. So all of those elements combined make Bristol a hard place to work, but fun.
And talking to like some of the, I know you talk to like some owners and some drivers. Are they all pretty easy to talk to? I mean, you don't have to name names. I'm not asking you to name any names. Are they easy to talk?
I would say all is a strong word. They're, just like any other segment of society, you've got all different personalities and demeanors. Some drivers who are easier to talk to than others for a variety of reasons. I I will say my vast experience was positive, and I'm thankful for that. I would say 95% of the experiences I had with drivers were positive. There were occasions that weren't. And they were drivers that, sometimes were a little more challenging to talk to. But, you know, again, I'm a reporter. They're the driver. They're out there doing a job. And I understand that their priority was their race car and what they were doing on the racetrack, and certainly not talking to the media. So I don't hold it against anybody. Those bad experiences, which, like I said, were very few and far between.
And then I know kind of moving towards the end of your NASCAR career, it ended in the end of 2016, the beginning of 2017.
The end of 2016. My final race was the 2016 championship race at Homestead, which honestly, I can't imagine, going out on a better note. As a pit reporter, I covered Jimmy Johnson's pit that day, and Jimmy Johnson captured his 7th championship, which was, an experience that I'll never forget. Just the emotion in that pit box. It was not a great day leading up to the end for Jimmy Johnson and Chad Knaus, the crew chief. They struggled for a good part of it, from the very beginning. They had problems getting through inspection. I think they started at the back of the field, fought their way toward the front, never could really get there. They fought with the race car all day long. And then at the end, there was a crash that changed everything and allowed Jimmy Johnson to get right up front on a restart. And he was able to capitalize and won the race and the championship, which, of course, a 7th championship in NASCAR is a hallowed number. And so the celebration that ensued afterwards just enveloped me, because everybody just, came in on the pit box, and I'm standing there and I'm just getting crushed by all these people celebrating, and just absolutely amazing. I'll never forget that. At the time, I didn't know it was my last race. But looking back, I'm fortunate in saying that, if you're going to go out, that's a cool way to go out.
Yeah. So you mentioned something a couple of times. I just want to ask. You mentioned like the pit boxes you're assigned. How do they assign pit boxes? Like, who is it? Which way is that done?
So we have a pit producer who's in the truck in the television compound, who basically her name is Renee. I'm talking at NBC. Renee had a lead, and she was amazing. She was able to coordinate 4 people all at once, knowing when to call pit stops, everything. So
Oh, wow.
she would take the pit grid, which was established a couple days before the race, usually, and she would cut it into quadrants and just assign a pit reporter to each one. Of course, there were 4 of us then. I know that the networks have consolidated that, and there's not always 4 anymore, but still, that she would break it up into quadrants. I mean, you wouldn't have a pit here and then a pit way over here. They try to keep it as physically close so that you could run between your zone and cover as many pits as possible. It's usually let's say 10 pits per pit reporter. Not always. Sometimes it was fewer than that, because what they would also like to take into consideration is, like, you have to have, drivers who would be a story that day. So sometimes, up front, at the front of the pit zone, the first 5 drivers would be plenty for a pit reporter to cover. So they just give the first 5 to that front pit reporter, because, the way they qualify determines how they pick their pit stalls. So sometimes it'd be front loaded, and they just, give the first pit reporter there, 5, and then the next one 10, and so on and so forth. But they tried to break it up strategically so that we had a fair number of stories to talk about throughout the course of the day. And then, of course, race morning, we'd go around and we'd talk to the crew chiefs that we had and get as much information as we could out of those crew chiefs and bring them to the broadcast.
And they assign the pit stalls before or after qualifying. So if you do it before, you don't know who the drivers are.
So we assign, the television producers assign them after they've been chosen by the drivers. So NASCAR does their selection first, obviously, and then we look at the pit grid, how it's all set up, and then we break it out.
Oh, okay. And then you got out of NASCAR, was it by choice or?
Well, there's a lot of personal things I had going on, Josh, at the time that led me to that decision. I felt like it was the best thing for my family at the time.
Absolutely.
I don't want to get too much into it, but I had a lot of things going on the personal side of my life that being on the road wouldn't have helped at all. So I took myself out of it. I in some ways I regret it because I wish I were there still at some points. However, I was able to take a long look at my life and my career and adjust.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fortunate enough that the folks at NBC Connecticut were able to give me an opportunity doing something I've never done. I've never worked in local television, and I've never covered hard news. So making the pivot, and I've been there now almost 2 years, it'll be 2 years in April, has been an adjustment. It's forced me out of my comfort zone. It's allowed me to learn a different aspect of broadcasting and journalism. I've learned a lot, and I'm thankful I did it. And I'm continuing on that path, and not sure exactly where it's going to lead, but it's definitely an experience that I'm glad I've had the opportunity to have.
Now, do you cover all news? Or are you in one specific department, like maybe the
Yeah.
sports department?
Every day in the last year, sadly, it's been pandemic related mostly. Whether it's been vaccines or testing or, first responders and essential workers and focusing on stories there. Certainly we still cover, the other stuff like, crime, things of that nature. But yeah, it's local news A to Z that, we never know what it's going to be each day.
And you're on the nightly broadcast?
My schedule is Tuesday through Thursday during the day, which is meaning I'm on the 4, 5, and 6 o'clock news.
Okay.
And on Friday and Saturday, I'm on the 11 o'clock news.
Okay. And then I just have a hard question for you to kind of
Sure.
and if you weren't in television, you weren't doing broadcasting, what would you be doing? What's another career that you could see yourself doing?
That's a great question. I don't know. I've always, it's funny because, I've been in broadcasting so long, it's hard to imagine doing anything else. But I will say this, I like working with kids. I spent a little time during my off, in between this job and my previous job working in a high school.
Okay.
I enjoyed that. I've often thought maybe that, there was an opportunity to do that more full time, maybe teach broadcast journalism or teach journalism. So I've coached kids in sports, and honestly, that's amazing. I love coaching kids. I've coached baseball. That's one of the things I've been able to do because my schedule has allowed me to for the first time.
That's great.
I haven't in a while because my oldest son is now too old to play, but I coached my youngest son, and love coaching and just really enjoy working with the kids, like seeing the results of them learning as they go. So maybe that's what it would be. Maybe coaching or teaching.
So you mentioned teaching. So would you have any advice for students that are graduating that might be looking to get into broadcasting or sportscasting?
Yeah, I've got lots of advice. Be patient because it's not a slam dunk right out of there. Find something you love to cover because it'll make it so much easier. If you're putting together, your resume reel, make sure it's tight. Make sure it's about 4 minutes, maybe tops, and use your best stuff. And be realistic with where you send it. when you get out of college and you're a broadcasting major, uh, don't expect to be at ESPN. I'm not saying it can't happen, but that is not necessarily the most realistic first step. Um, Send it someplace that you might be able to get some traction. Also, be on LinkedIn. Connect with the recruiters. Connect with the recruiters who recruit for the big broadcasting entities that with Tegna or with Sinclair or with the Tribune. Connect with those recruiters. Get them your reel. They're in the it's their job function to find talent for their stations across the country, and they've got stations that fit all markets. Whether it's market 150 or it's market 25. Your talent will fit somewhere, and those recruiters, they'll also benefit by connecting with you because when they land somebody, I think they not only get a pat on the back but probably get a bonus. So definitely get with them, but be realistic. Put together a good reel. Don't make it too long. Use your best stuff. And also, once you have a reel, have someone look at it that's a professional,
Makes sense.
and get their reaction. They may see something in your reel that they say take out. Maybe
Hmm.
they'll also advise you to put something in that you didn't think of. So, but keep it tight and make sure it's your best stuff.
Mike, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. I know this is your day off. You have plenty of other things you could be doing today. So really, thank you so much for taking the
It's my
time.
pleasure, Josh. I appreciate you taking me down memory lane there.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for watching today. Did you enjoy this conversation? Let me know in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button below to be notified of all my conversations. See you again soon.